All right, how is everyone doing? Welcome to my channel. This channel is of the educational variety, and we try to fill you in on great theories and concepts and discoveries that you might not know about, because these are things that have been suppressed, things that the powers that be don't want you to know about, and in particular, the uh, your priests and your pastors don't want you to know about these Bible decodes that are happening over here. This is number 431, and we've been chopping up the New Testament and um, mostly from the perspective of the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament, and that is following the research of about a dozen authors at this point and counting, and that's scholars, but authors of literature, another few dozen of those classical, well, you know, literature from going way back into the, at least into the 16th century, who have all known that the Romans were the true authors of the New Testament. And they wrote the New Testament as a psychological operation against the Jews in order to mellow out the Jews, to mollify or otherwise tame or domesticate the Jews, who were a big headache for the Romans because of their separatist and very aggressive um, stance on their, status as a people. And when the Romans occupied Judea, they got nothing but a very high maintenance, difficult to govern group of people. And so they wrote a set of gospels about a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar and turning the other cheek and walking the extra mile, so that they would eventually utterly uh, neuter Judaism. And they did a lot of other things, including putting themselves at the end of the Jewish lineage as the second coming of Jesus, and um, ridiculing and deriding the Jews for cannibalism and various other foibles. And this has led to a very long chain of um, uh, people being totally deluded by Christianity. Um, Many of the descendants of these Romans know what the game, what the score is. Many of the descendants of the Jews who were eyewitnesses to this know what the game is. But there are tens of millions of Christians out there, uh, members of this uh, truther movement, who can't seem to turn the page and open up their books, but instead just kind of virtue signal around uh, Jesus is Lord and God is, you know, protecting us or has saved us or whatever it is that you say, but you don't have any evidence for it. There is no evidence for it, and there is a ton of evidence against it, and you won't look at any of it, but instead you just virtue signal. And so this is a big problem, and that's why I make these videos. You may not like me. Um, that's fine. Uh, you don't have to believe me either. I'm just asking you to do the research for yourself. Go get yourself a copy of Josephus's War of the Jews and compare it to your New Testament, particularly your book of Luke. Why don't you look at the life of Josephus and compare it with the life of Jesus? And then why don't you look at the military campaign of Titus and compare it with the ministry of Jesus? And then you can look at the um, uh, you know uh, look at the uh, seven seals and compare that with um, the seven seals listed in not only in the epistles, in Revelation, and in Josephus. Or look at the Passover lamb um, from both Josephus and uh, Jesus and in Exodus 12. All of these different, there are many, many different themes of um, uh, disclosure that you can determine that whoever wrote Josephus, and we know that Josephus was issued by the Romans, whoever wrote Josephus also wrote the New Testament. Now, they backdated the New Testament to make it look like it came out 40 years earlier, but it was written at the same time by the same people for the same reason, and that was to mellow out and mollify the Jews and anybody else who happened to believe in this foolishness. Now, when the Romans did write the New Testament, they included a lot of very valuable and uplifting, edifying material because it is a limited hangout. It had to look good, it had to look like a religion. You can't deceive somebody without including a lot of stuff that, they can trust and that they can believe in. But when the Romans did put in all this kind of good stuff into their New Testament, they borrowed it from much earlier sources, in particular ancient India, ancient China, Japan, also ancient Roman and Greek philosophy and religion, especially Stoicism and Cynicism, the pagan mystery schools, astrology, uh, numerology, shamanism, magic, uh, a lot of paganism, all the stuff about Son of God, the Son of God, that's all pagan. There's a ton of pagan literature about like every single important person that had ever lived in the pagan world was seen as being the Son of God. Plato and Socrates and Pythagoras, these people were all seen as being the Son of God. Um, and that, in fact, was something that the Jews bristled against because the Jews didn't have that tradition in their religion. Um, Also, an ancient Jewish, like Old Testament uh, references are also in the Roman Gospels, as well as ancient Egyptian stuff, Persian, Mithraism, and uh, uh, what's the guy's name? Zoroastrianism, and there's probably a lot of Sumerian, Pygmy, Mexican influences as well. And we're looking at a book by an author named Kersey Graves, who wrote back in the 19th century, but who does it's called 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christianity. And he looks at some of these influences that far predate Christianity, of themes that are exactly echoed into Christianity, but they have much earlier original sources. A lot of Christians will tell you that Christianity is original and unique, and this book is very good evidence that it is anything but, and that it is 100% completely derivative. There isn't a single theme, motif, or episode in the New Testament that does not have an earlier antecedent. And this chapter is chapter 39, which is on kind of, um, he goes into talking about how, well, if God is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent and infinite, then the Son of God must be those things as well. But there is a ton of evidence that the Son of God is not any of those things. And he's recounting a lot of these evidences. And so we left off with his number 10 on the list, which is he became on certain occasions hungered, like a finite being would. Like an infinite being would not become hungry. So, number 11, he also became thirsty, as in John 19:28, like perishable mortals. Number 12, he often slept like mortals, and thus became to dumb forgetfulness a prey. Number 13, he sometimes became weary like human beings, as in John 4:6. Number 14, he was occasionally tempted like fallible mortals, as in Matthew 4:1. Number 15, his soul became exceeding sorrowful as a frail, finite being, as in Matthew 26:38. He also disclosed the weakness of human passion by weeping in John 11:35. He was originally an imperfect being, made perfect through suffering, as it states in Hebrews 2:10. He increased in wisdom and stature, which is said in Luke 2:52. Therefore, he must have possessed finite, changeable, mortal attributes. And he finally died and was buried like all perishable mortals. He could not possibly, from these considerations, have been a god. It is utterly impracticable to associate with or comprehend in a God of infinite powers and infinite attributes all or any of these finite human qualities. Dark, intellectually dark, indeed, must be that mind, and sunk, sorrowfully sunk in superstition, that can worship a being as the great omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent I am, who possessed all those qualities which were constitutionally characteristic of the pious, the noble, the devout, the godlike, yet finite and fallible Jesus, according to his own admissions and the representations of his own interested biographers. The only step which the disciples of the Christian faith have made toward disproving or setting aside these arguments, objections, and difficulties is that of assigning the incarnate Jesus a double or twofold nature, the amalgamation of the human and the divine, a postulate and a groundless assumption, which we have proved and demonstrated by 13 arguments, which we believe to be unanswerable, is not only absurd, illogical, and impossible, but foolish and ludicrous in the highest degree. This senseless hypothesis and every other assumption and argument made use of by the professors of the Christian faith uh, to vindicate their favorite dogma of the divinity of Jesus, we have shown to be equally applicable to the demigods of ancient heathen, more than 20 of whom were invented with the same combination of human and divine qualities which the followers and worshippers of Jesus claim for him. Testimony of the Father against the divinity of the Son. The Father utterly precludes the Son from any participation in the divine essence or any claim in the Godhead by such declarations as the following: I am Jehovah, and beside me there is no Savior, as in Isaiah 43:11. How then, we would ask, can Jesus Christ be the Savior? I, Jehovah, am thy Savior and thy Redeemer. Then Christ can be neither the Savior nor Redeemer. There is no God else beside me, a just God and a Savior. There is none beside me, as in Isaiah 14:21. So the Father virtually declares, according to the inspired prophet Isaiah, that the Son, in a divine sense, cannot be either God, Savior, or Redeemer. Again, Hosea 13:4 says, I am Jehovah, thy God, and thou shalt not acknowledge a God beside me. Here, Christ is not only by implication cut off from the Godhead, but positively prohibited from being worshiped as a God. And thus, the testimony of the Father disproves and sets aside the divinity of the Son. Except for the fact that God is so indecisive that maybe he changed his mind and decided that maybe I will create a God beside me. This is all ridiculous. But testimony of the mother. When Mary found, after a long search, her son Jesus in the temple, disputing with the doctors, and chided or reproved him for staying from home without the consent of his parents, and declared, Thy father and I sought thee sorrowing, which is in Luke 2:48. She proclaimed a twofold denial of his divinity. In the first place, it cannot be possible that she regarded her son Jesus as that awful being before whom even the devout saints bow in trembling fear, when she used such language and evinced such a spirit as she did. Why hast thou dealt with us, thus dealt with us, in her chiding language? And then, when she speaks of Joseph as his father, thy father and I, she issues a declaration against his divinity, which ought to be regarded as scuttling or settling the question forever. For who could know better than the mother, or rather, who could know but the mother, who the father of the child Jesus was? And as she acknowledges it was Joseph, she thus repudiates the story of the Immaculate Conception, which is just one chapter earlier in the book of Luke, which constitutes the whole basis for the claim of his divinity. Hence, the testimony of the mother also disproves his title to the Godhead. Testimony or disclaimer of the Son. We will show by a specific citation of 25 texts that there is not one attribute comprehended in or peculiar to a divine and infinite being, but that Christ rejects as applicable to himself, that he most conclusively disclaims every attribute of a divine being, both by precept and practice, and often in the most explicit language. By declaring, "The Son can do nothing of himself," which is John 5:10. He most emphatically disclaims the attribute of omnipotence. For an omnipotent being can need no aid and can accept of none. And when we acknowledged and avowed his ignorance of the day of judgment, which must be presumed to be the most important event in the world's history, he disclaimed the attribute of omniscience. Of that day and hour knoweth no man, neither the Son, but the Father only, which is in Matthew 24:36. Now, as an omniscient being must possess all knowledge, his avowed ignorance in this case is a confession he was not omniscient and hence not a God. And when he declares, "I am glad for your sakes I was not there," at the grave of Lazarus, he most distinctly disavows being omnipresent and thus denies to himself another essential attribute of an infinite God. And the emphatic declaration, "I live by the Father," which is in John 6:57, is a direct disclaimer of the attributes of self-existence, as a being who lives by another cannot be self-existent and per consequence not the infinite God. He disclaims possessing infinite goodness, another essential attribute of a supreme divine being. "Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God," as in Mark 10:18. He disclaimed divine honors and directed them to the Father. "I honor my Father," John 8:49. "I receive not honor from men," John 5:41. He recommended supreme worship to the Father and not to himself. "The true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth," as in John 4:21. He ascribed supreme dominion to the Father. "Thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever," as in Matthew 6:13. It will be seen from the foregoing text that Christ also acknowledges that the kingdom is the Father's. A God without a kingdom would be a ludicrous state of things. And he conceded supreme authority to the Father. "My doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me," as in John 7:16. He considered the Father as the supreme protector and preserver of even his own disciples. "I pray that thou shouldst keep them from the evil," John 17:15. What omnipotence not able to protect his own disciples? Okay. There are more. We'll get into those tomorrow. I think he's kind of splitting hairs here, but it's an interesting list of proofs that Jesus was not omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, and infinitely good, and all that. But it's all kind of within the ruse of the fact that the Romans made up the whole story in the first place. And so it's kind of irrelevant. But Kersey Graves doesn't know that. And so he comes up with a list for kind of denying the divinity of Jesus, which is on the right track, but can go a step further and just deny the existence of Jesus, and that would hit home a little bit harder. But by showing that all of the sources of Jesus are much come from much earlier um, antecedents, um, that is, I think, why we're reading this book. I see the value of that, um, and this chapter is kind of going off on a tangent, but we should finish this chapter tomorrow and be on to hopefully more germane uh, material. All right, like, share, subscribe, comment, and contribute, and we will come back tomorrow with Bible Decode episode number 432. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.